He was interviewing Bernie Ecclestone while still at university. Now, he catches up with all the drivers at every single race. He's worked at the BBC, Motorsport, and is now senior writer for Formula One. Today, we're in the Grandstand with Lawrence Barretto.
So we are in the Grandstand with Lawrence Barretto, F1's senior writer. How are you, Lawrence?
I'm very good, thanks, Jim. Very good. We're in the midst of launch season, so it's super busy. But I love it because it just means the season's about to start and the adrenaline's flowing, and I just can't wait to get going with the action.
I bet. Well, for those who don't recognise Lawrence, that might be because he's not wearing a mask right now, after we would have seen him wearing a mask non-stop last year. And also, your hair is a little bit shorter than it was last season. You went for a complete bald look for raising money for prostate cancer. How's the regrowth going?
Yes, I'm really pleased with the fact of how quickly it's grown back, actually. And it's keeping me warmer in winter now. Because I tell you what, when I first shaved it off and then I came back from Abu Dhabi, it was freezing. So I'm delighted that the hair's grown back, definitely. And you know what, the mask thing, I've just got so used to wearing it now at racetracks that I almost forget that people can't see my face. You just get used to it, don't you? And you just do what you have to do. But at least in this format, although still not ideal, we can actually see each other's faces.
Yeah, it's a bit of a novelty at the moment. So, of course, you have been working a little bit on the TV side, or the YouTube side at least, with F1. How's that gone for you? Have you really enjoyed last year? That was a big step up and a big difference for you.
Oh, yeah, I loved it. I think in this job, I love Formula One as a core, but what I really enjoy doing is something different. And so I had a few more opportunities last year to, like you said, move into the presenting side. We did a show with Will Buxton called Weekend Warm Up, which is on YouTube and on our digital platforms, f1.com. And I was part of the presenting team for the pre-race show, which is on F1 TV, our OTT streaming service. And that was live. So that was live TV. So that was a massive step up for me in terms of just getting used to little things like going to production meetings, having an earpiece and kind of taking direction on that score. It was a real baptism of fire, but I absolutely loved it. Like, the adrenaline was awesome. Will's great to work with. So it was really easy for me to slip in, to that role. He made it as easy as possible for me. And it was just another way of covering the sport. One that I've covered for more than 10 years. It was just nice to do it in a slightly different ways, obviously, than just the written form, really.
Yeah, well, I bet that was a completely different way. And Formula One, of course, has changed so much recently in terms of its presentation, which is terrific. And I do want to go into all of that, actually, with you. But let's start from the start, I suppose. I understand that you knew that you wanted to be a journalist from quite a young age. That's quite a special thing to have.
I was super lucky, really. When I was growing up, I knew that I loved Formula One. And then I just knew that when it became clear I wasn't going to be a racing driver because I wasn't good enough, I thought that the next best thing was to write about it and then at some point talk about it. And so journalism seemed like the best route to do that. I enjoyed English language at school. I like writing, basically. I like writing with a fountain pen at a really basic level. And so I thought that, journalism was something that really interested me. So I was quite lucky that I could focus, as young as I was probably 12, 13. I knew that definitely that's what I wanted to do. So I could kind of focus on the subjects that I chose for GCSE, for A-levels, then already have a real long-term view if I wanted to go to Bournemouth Uni. So I knew that 5, 6, 7 years before to do multimedia journalism. So I could just be really focused on that. And I think for me that gave me confidence and it relaxed me a little bit because I kind of knew what the target was and I just had to go about and kind of try my best to try and achieve it, really.
You didn't waste any time as well. I understood you interviewed Bernie Ecclestone when you were still at uni, is that right?
Yeah, so at uni, our course was very much about being quite hands-on. And that's partly why I picked it, because for me, I don't enjoy sitting in a lecture theatre. I just don't learn that way. I kind of want to go out and do things, I want to make things, I want to talk to people. And so that course kind of gave us the opportunities, and you could do as much as you wanted. You could go into Bournemouth Town Centre and just interview people in and around there, or you could try and interview Bernie Ecclestone. So I had a go at trying to interview Bernie, and unbelievably, it paid off. I just sent an email explaining who I was. He got back to me pretty quickly. I had one interview, and then I went back and had a second interview, because he did say to me, if I ever needed anything, give him a call. And so I did, and he replied. So it was a great, quite a great learning experience. It kind of made me realize that if you try, then someone might say yes. Don't get me wrong, lots of people said no. I put out a lot of requests for a lot of interviews, and they came back, and you kind of just have to accept that, because everyone can't say yes. But it was great that Bernie said yes. It was a real school in interviewing as well, because he's one of the hardest, if not still the hardest person in sport that I've ever interviewed, just because he keeps you on your toes. But it kind of, that just made it clear to me that that's what I wanted to do, was interviewing. So I said, I did want to become a journalist, but it was the interviewing aspect, the talking to people, the getting information out of people, that really interested me.
So how was that with, you say that it was quite a difficult interview, he still is quite a difficult person to interview. Any examples of keeping you on your toes that he tried to catch you up with when you were so young?
Before that interview, because I wanted to be as prepped as possible, I wrote a list of questions. I can't exactly remember how long it was. It wasn't longer than, say, 10-15 minutes. But I remember thinking, oh, well, this will be more than enough for 10 to 15 minutes based on my experience of interviewing other people. But I'd say we're 4 or 5 minutes in, and already I was running out of questions. And I was like, well, okay. So because he would reply so quickly, his answers would be so short and sharp. And so that's what I kind of mean about keeping me on my toes. You always just had to be ready to respond. He waits for no one. He almost, I think, enjoys the joust, the kind of fight, the battle that you're having between you two, because it's just fun. It's fun for him. So that was a real lesson in thinking on my feet, trying not to ask silly questions, trying to ask open questions in the bid to try and allow him to talk for a bit longer. So I learned in just one interview, I just learned so many interviewing skills, I think.
Oh, that's great. And has that changed when you've interviewed him subsequently in more recent years, I guess? Is that something that you've known how to handle him?
I don't get as stressed as I used to when I first interviewed him. Towards the end of the times that I interviewed him at track, I knew what the score was. I knew that, just have a ton of topics in my head. Obviously, my knowledge of Formula One had improved. My experience of interviewing had improved dramatically. So I was less worried about it. You see, I do interviews these days, and I see them as just like you and I are doing right now, chatting. I don't get nervous so much. I get butterflies when I go on live, and it's a big interview. Of course I do, but then that doesn't stop me from doing my job in a way that I think, when you get nervous for, say, exams like I used to do, sometimes that can stop you thinking or stop you processing. Whereas now I'm just a little bit more relaxed about it all. And that really helps when I interviewed him in subsequent years. Of
course. And well, we go from those subsequent years then that you went to Bournemouth University, like you say, and you graduated, and then you've gone from, well, I know you're working at the BBC covering the Olympics, and you're at Formula One, so it's international sports to international sports. You just seem to keep on growing. You want to talk us through those years?
So when I was at university, I'm quite target driven. So I set myself some targets for a roughly 10-year period, and that was to work for the BBC, to cover an Olympics, to interview 5 big name interviewees, which were Lewis Hamilton, Valentino Rossi, Michael Schumacher, Jenson Button, and Ronnie O'Sullivan, because I was a big snooker fan at the time. So I set myself those targets, and to cover a Grand Prix live and ideally cover a full season. So I guess every decision that I tried to make after university was to try and put myself in a position whereby I could hopefully at least give myself a shot of achieving all of those goals. So the first job I had was for a magazine called Sport. It was a weekly magazine, free, like Shortlist is still going in London. You get it at tube stations. And I just got a job there. And that what they wanted really was someone who was enthusiastic about motorsport and Formula One. So I'm like, well, this is brilliant, because this is me. And I've gone in there, and the lovely team that I work with, but none of them were interested in Formula One. So they were like, just fill your boots. And within a couple of months I'd interviewed Lewis, and this is crazy for me to think that that I'd done a cover interview for a magazine with Lewis Hamilton a few months into like my first full-time role really in Formula One. And then it was just up to me, and I managed to go to Valencia to interview Schumacher when he was at Mercedes. That was one of my favorite interviews. We'd sat on top of the Mercedes motorhome overlooking the harbour. He made me a cup of tea, like it was so random. And we just had we spent the first 15-20 minutes talking about running. And he hadn't met me before, so he was just quite inquisitive to, find out who I am, what I do, that kind of thing, which blew my mind anyway. And then we sat down and we had a really insightful interview. And, I interview a lot of sports people, and often there can be a door or a wall up, and they've just decided they want to treat this interview in a certain way. But I felt in this particular scenario, Michael was just really open. He was happy to answer my questions, didn't give me really PR answers. I appreciate he was in, the back end of his racing career. He'd won it all by then. And, he'd relax in a way that, for example, Kimi Räikkönen has done these days. But I still, had huge respect for him, and, still have a huge respect for everything he's achieved. And so I was really grateful that I had that opportunity to talk to him, and he treated me in that way, and he opened up, and it was one of my many favorite interviews that I've done.
Well, it's out of your 5 targets as well. And I've got to ask though, the big question, how is a German cup of tea?
Oh, well, fortunately he has it the way I do, which is milk, no sugar, and like not too much milk as well. Like I literally like a splash of milk. And bag out of the cup as well. So like it was perfect. Like I actually couldn't really believe it.
The Brit going to speak to a German and the German making the cup of tea. You couldn't write it, could you?
No. It was in scenarios like that often, and this is not a bad thing, but because you're so busy and drivers are so busy that normally I will walk in, Michael will already be sitting there. I'm going, I talk to him, I go out, the next journalist goes in, and if you need anything, someone will be on hand to go get you something. But in this scenario, Michael was happy to do the tea himself. And you just don't really see that these days. It was just a really nice thing to do.
Nice.
And, I still, at that point, I'd only been to a handful of races as a journalist, as a full-time working journalist. So for me, to have such good experiences like this so early on in my career, it not only made me want to do it more, but it made me look on the paddock on a really favorable light, really. And so I think that's really enhanced the way that I work and operate in my job today. Amazing.
No, there's a very, not necessarily a baptism of fire, but it's a baptism of high-end sports people here. These are the top talent that you're interviewing. But I want to talk about a little bit with sports journalism. So you've been doing that for so long, like you say, you talk about back at the Valencia Grand Prix, that was quite a while ago now. But how do you think things have changed in recent times with, the much bigger advent of Twitter and a lot more media? We're talking right now on a Zoom call. How do you think a teenage Lawrence Barretto would handle getting into journalism today?
It is completely different. I remember when I was at uni, we didn't do an online course. Like there was no online element really to the course. You're aware that, say, newspapers had websites, but it wasn't really a focal point. These days, if you were to do a degree, I would say the vast majority of it has got to be in and around online, social media. Even the way that you consume video content obviously is online now in much shorter form than we would have really learnt about or focused upon at uni. When I had my first job at Sport Magazine, it was all about the mag, really. We weren't really trying to promote it on social because Twitter was still in its infancy, really. And it was only really when I went to the BBC, obviously a much bigger company across multiple platforms, network television, that extended across the world, not just in the UK. The website was growing, a massive load of radio stations. It was only really then that I kind of started to see how important using social media and Twitter and Instagram, how important it was. So I guess these days, if I was my age, a young age now, trying to break in, I guess it's trying to use social media for all the positives that it brings, which is building your knowledge, because you have so much insight now into sports people, insight into the people who write about the sport that you're covering, more content, generally speaking. I guess it's just trying to read as much as you can, be across things as much as you can, and trying to improve your skill set in writing in short, punchy formats that works on social media. For Instagram, knowing how successful how important photography is, trying to kind of see that it's not just about anymore writing a news story. It's about trying to package it in a multi-platform kind of way, and then promoting it and using various tools that you can to promote it to get the most eyeballs on it. So it's very different, and I guess that's what I love about this job, is that obviously once I'd done my degree and then I'd got my first job, it wasn't just about getting the next job, it was about continuing to learn about all the different platforms and the different way you are supposed to present news or the feature that you're doing, or a television piece, how it changes, and you always have to be adaptable to essentially what people want, because if people don't want it, no one's going to read it or write or watch it. So I guess it's just trying to keep an eye out onto what works and what doesn't work, and adapting what you do to fit that mold.
So not necessarily tying directly to that, but I do have a question which I suppose ties in with the Twitter thing in particular, because Twitter's on the pulse. It's all news, and like you say there, you're having to write about it in a short and punchy format, but you're also doing a lot of feature writing. Is there a preference? Would you like to exclude all the Twitter stuff and focus on features, or do you actually prefer getting the news?
What I really love about my job right now is that I do it all. So I'm I'm focusing on preparing and being ready for when a team launches. So I'm ready to go on the news side, and that's, writing the main news story that the car's been launched, writing follow-up pieces, whether that's interviewing a team boss, drivers, and kind of doing follow-ups, quotes pieces. Then I write an analysis on, the key things to take away from that launch. So that's 3 different styles of, written pieces. And then I do a piece at Will Buxton where we talk about it on, via Zoom. And that sits on YouTube and on our digital platforms on f1.com. So I think what I really love about my job is that I'm across all platforms, and I'm kind of across the story. And then I can work with my colleagues, obviously, in social media, with the video team, and then obviously with my wider editorial team, to tie it all together. But I suppose what I just really like is kind of being in the thick of it and trying to be on top of it, keeping in touch with team personnel, making sure that I'm kind of abreast of all the major developments, making sure I'm talking to people consistently, that I'm super organized, that I know exactly what's coming, that I'm chasing people at the right time. I'm debriefing the people who need to know. It's those kind of things. And so I suppose I'm very lucky in that I've managed to find a role that allows me to do so many different things. It's not just about me writing a news story anymore.
Yeah, well, it's you're everywhere, like you say. You've got the online stuff now with the video stuff. How did you find the going from mainly written work into going onto that jump into being on camera, be it on webcam like now, or actually on those weekend warm-ups when you're in the paddock? Did Will Buxton give you some tips on how to handle it, or?
I was quite lucky in that from uni, really, we started doing projects on video, and TV and how it works. And then through every part of the jobs that I've done. So when I was at the BBC, I was on, I was a pundit on BBC World News, for example, talking about Formula One. I've been on the BBC News at 10, for example, talking about, say, when Channel 4 took over the rights to broadcast. So I've done what I would describe as, for me, pretty cool things to do, quite pressurized moments. And it was it was particularly satisfying for me that I was able to do that, and it came out, you know, pretty well, and I was really, you know, I was delighted that I had the opportunity to do it, but also that I managed to evolve myself, and I've definitely got better. You can see from the first thing that I did with these guys at F1, the first show that I did a weekend warm up to the last one that I did at the end of the year. People tell me that, you know, the difference is huge, and, you know, that's not I don't think that's a negative thing. I think that's just a positive thing that I've evolved through the year. And as I said earlier, like working with someone like Will, he's so good at presenting. I think there's very few people in this world who are just very good in that particular role that can kind of carry a broadcast. He's so good at that and so natural at it that instantly makes you, as this sort of the co-host or co-anchor, it kind of just gives you that relaxed that, you know, if it all goes wrong, Will's going to handle it, basically.
Yeah.
He'll be able to save you from every situation that you kind of walk into. And so that kind of gives you the confidence, or it gave me the confidence at least, to relax into it, say how I feel, kind of have a bit of banter with him. And then to a point whereby, you know, if the director says something and Will hasn't heard it, I'm confident enough to be able to then kind of steer the ship in that direction. Or, you know, if I've spotted that the cameraman's given us a signal because he spotted something, I can kind of draft us that way. And I'm not by any means saying I'm running the show at that point, but it's more that I'm just there if, you know, in a scenario whereby I can do, and I would never have been able to do that to start with. So, you know, the more that I've done it, the more consistency that I've had, it's just helped me grow really as a presenter. Like I still don't really refer to myself as a presenter, but I suppose in some way I am, obviously. But there was a moment last year in Russia when Will tested positive for COVID, just a day or two before we flew out. And because of various reasons, you know, visas for Russia in particular, it's not as simple as just flying someone out, because we just can't, because it's just not feasible to do that. And especially in COVID when we were limited flying anyway. So we were left with the option of, well, we either do nothing and we can all the content, or we have a stab and I try and just do what, you know, I try and take over and run it, you know, just in the interim until he's back. And so I've got a great team of producers, a great camera team, and we managed to do weekend warm up, you know, me solo, having never done it before. And I tell you what, I said earlier that I don't get nervous, but I was properly nervous about that. And, you know, we've been talking now for a while, and so I clearly can talk and I'm comfortable talking, but talking for 20 minutes when you're trying to do it in one take, doing something you've never done, trying to fill that air is difficult, you know. And that's probably why I have so much admiration and respect for people who do it on a full-time basis. So, but just doing that just gave me the confidence, you know, to kick on from there. And I hosted Tech Talk, which was great because it was a different type of show, behind a desk, talking to Mark Hughes, who was on a TV screen back in the UK. You know, I was fortunate that I got to try a few different things. And the great thing is people gave me the opportunities. People helped me, you know, to settle in as best I could. But I kind of feel like I think I did a good job. You know, I managed to hold it together. All the content went out. I worked with Tom Clarkson on Sunday and hosted the pre-race show, and that was huge. You know, he's another great guy to work with. I think it's just like, for me, it's the more I do it, the easier it becomes, the more relaxed I become in doing it. And so hopefully I'll still get many more opportunities to do it, because I really enjoy it. It's a great job. I know I'm very lucky to do it, and I'll do it as long as someone will let me, essentially.
Yeah, I bet you will. And you're doing a really good job. I genuinely mean that. It's been great. The weekend warm-up is, you know, one of a suite of products that Formula One are putting out at the moment for the digital platforms. Do you think that's vitally important? You mentioned earlier, you know, getting your finger on the pulse with Twitter and whatnot, just the changing landscape of it. Have Formula One been a bit too slow to get there where they need to be now with the YouTube generation, so to speak? And do you think now they're actually making up for lost time with the plethora of content that's available?
Everything changed when Liberty took over and, you know, the Bernie era ended. Liberty just realised that social media is important, but not just social media, it's digital media. And that's why they created a digital department. And that's why I came on board at the start of the 2018 season. you know, the team's grown massively since then, and you know, we're a proper unit now, working really well together, you know, editorial, social and video, and the content that we produce is it's so impressive for the team that we've got and the amount that we churn out. I'm really proud to be able to work with some of these guys because they're so talented. And I think that, you know, okay, we are probably starting from a lower level because we're behind major sports and what they're doing, but we're trying our best to catch up. And, you know, I think if I was watching Formula One now as a fan, and I am a fan because obviously that's why I got into this job, because I love Formula One. I'd love it even more because there's so much content. If you wanted to just absorb yourself in Formula One for all, you know, all day or all weekend, there's so much content that you can watch on F1 TV, all the old races. We're trying to do more magazine features behind the scenes. We're trying to do more analysis through, you know, technical programs. There's so much more to read. I think we're just trying to give so many more options, so that if you want it, it's, you know, it's there, and it's not just trying to meet the hardcore fans, which are, you know, hugely important to Formula One, but it's trying to bring new fans on board and hope, you know, try and sell to them, you know, what we love about Formula One, and, you know, why we enjoy watching it, why we enjoy working in it, and that why we think it's a great sport. And that's down to us to try and tell the right stories, to find those stories, and to present it in a digestible way.
I think it's coming across. You know, you mentioned before, you're not going to accidentally start covering Formula One. You're doing it because you've got a passion, and it does come across. So how long did it take for you to stop treating going to the races as a fan experience and start actually feeling like work? Like, do you get to the point where it's, oh, I've got to go to Barcelona tomorrow, I want to actually spend the weekend watching Netflix or anything?
I don't think I've ever not wanted to go to a race, because I know what I don't want, and what I don't want is a 9-to-5 office job. That's just not what I'm after. It's traveling to the races. It's that whole experience, you know. If the travel side is great, you know, it's meeting people in the airport that you see every other weekend. It's seeing the same people out, you know, at dinner and in bars or restaurants when you're out. It's seeing the same people in the paddock who, you know, many of whom are my friends now because I've just known them for, you know, 10 years or so now. So the job doesn't feel like a job. Of course it's hard. Like I'm away for long periods of time. The hours are long. I know, so during that last triple header last year, you obviously stay out for the whole 3 weeks, and so that means you technically could have slightly easier days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday between each race, where you've just got the normal reaction work and the preview work to do. But obviously we had Lewis Hamilton testing positive for COVID, the who's going to fill his seat story. You know, there were days where I had 2-3 hours sleep because you're just working late and then you're getting up early, and you obviously don't know when these things are going to happen, and things are changing so quickly. And you've got to, you know, if you're going to report on it, particularly if I'm doing more presenting work, you've got to be at the track at certain points. They're really long days, but as I say, like a lot of the people that I work with have been in Formula One for a long time, and the only reason we do it is because we love it. And so I suppose as long as I love it, I'll keep doing it, and you know, I don't feel like stopping anytime soon.
So you say, you know, with journalism that you're going out there with, you know, quite a lot of other journalists there. Do you think there's any friendly rivalries to be the first one to get the story, so to speak? Like, I know you're friends with Chris Medland, for example. Do you want to make sure that you get in before him? Would you actually give each other hints?
Because we travel together, or we spend a lot of time together in, say, media centres in a normal world. And then a lot of us, you know, have got closer and we are proper friends now. It's in the nature that, you know, you talk about things, you might share things, but there is still the point that you are there to do a job. And so to an extent, of course, you want to beat some of your colleagues, your other, you know, rivals, I guess you'd call them, to stories. Of course you do. My job is slightly different now in that I work for Formula One. So I suppose breaking news probably isn't really exactly what I do anymore. It's more kind of being on top of the news and analysing the news. But there's a healthy respect between journalists. You know, you can be best friends with someone and someone will beat you to a story and you won't be you won't be annoyed by them. You won't be annoyed that they didn't tell you. You'll just have massive respect that, you know, they got it there, and then vice versa. When you eventually get a story before them, there'll be respect the other way. I think that, of course, you know, particularly for papers, you know, there's an intensity to break news stories to sell papers. So of course, between that group of journalists, there's perhaps slightly more competition, but again, there's a lot more respect between them as well. So I've never fallen out with someone. I don't get annoyed if someone beats me to a story. I think I've just got a lot of respect for people, and, you know, honestly, if someone does a good story or they do a great interview or a great feature, I'm more than happy to, you know, to tell them that. I tell people on social media, go read this, because at the end of the day, I just want the best content to be out there, and, you know, I can't write it all and they can't write it all, and you're not always going to get the best interview, or you're not always going to get the story. That's just life. So I would say, particularly because of the nature of our job and the way that we travel, it's just a bit more for family. I know that word is loosely used a lot, but there is a mutual respect and a camaraderie, just because of that's what you've got to do to survive, I guess, in some ways, in a nice way.
No, it does. Well, it makes a lot of sense, because you're talking about how you spend so much time away from home as well. So you have to almost adopt that family. So there's a whole bunch of you, and it's going to be, you know, fairly young people on tour going around the world. You'll be one of the few people that managed to visit as many countries as you did last year. So are there any safe for work stories that you've got that you and the guys would have got up to in years gone by?
I think we're quite when I've entered Formula One, I got into the sport at a time when there's a fair few young people. So you mentioned Chris Medland, there's Nate Saunders, there's Phil Horton, Luke Smith. There's quite a few like young journalists around the same age, Lawrence Edmondson, and so it's fortuitous that obviously that means they're the kind of people that you naturally, because they're around the same age, you end up spending, you know, more time with them, say after work, so to speak, whether that's we're just running the track, or if you go to a media event like Red Bull, great, and they organize so many media events. We played camel polo, for example, a couple of years ago in Abu Dhabi, or we've done dune buggy racing together. We've done some really cool things where you're essentially just hanging out with your mates. Then you finish that activity and you spend time getting down to work and interviewing, you know, Christian Horner or the drivers, or you know, speaking to the team and trying to get some insight into what's going on, and, you know, trying to tell some more colourful stories about the team. And so it's a fine balance between work and play, but I think it's important to have both those elements when you're away so much and you're working such long hours. So you know what, we've done a lot of cool things. We do quizzes, you know, Williams hosts a quiz every year, and you know, Claire Williams, when, you know, she was there, she used to hand out penalty shots, so you can imagine that this night probably got a bit rowdy, and it did, you know, every year. And then, you know, that quiz would finish and you'd go back to someone's, you know, shared house and you'd have a party, like, you know, and then everyone would come in the next day on time and do their job. So it's you work hard, but you play hard as well. And you know, there's a lot of stories and a lot of things that happened that, you know, maybe we'll wait till we're all out of F1 and we can write a book about it. But you know, but we try to touch on some of those stories, Nate Saunders and Chris Medland and I, when we do our Pad Hoc podcast, because that podcast is just about us chatting about things that you wouldn't not ordinarily see. So it's not about us analysing Lewis Hamilton's new contract. It's about, you know, what we think of the new liveries or the new car launches that are happening based on our experience of going to them. And we started that just because it was in lockdown and we didn't get to hang out that often together. And we thought, well, there's a hole here that, you know, no one's really talking about this kind of thing. And we've got loads of stories. We're only going to be talking about these stories to each other in the pub. So why don't we, you know, put it into a podcast? So it's, you know, you'd think that we'd get tired of each other spending so much time with each other, but we don't. Like, I'm not tired of them yet. Like, and I suppose that's why it works. It's why we still do this job. It's probably the people who we are. It's a lot of fun.
Talking about the Williams and the Red Bull days that you mentioned there. So that's quite informal. And I'm guessing when you have these, these days with Claire Williams handing out shots, that you get quite a lot of off the record conversations. How important are those for your journalism when you can start going on the record or sniffing out stories, for example?
I think relationships in Formula One are, for me, the most important thing. I mean, as to start with, I just love people. I love talking to people, and that's why interviewing is my favorite part of the job. But it's not just interviewing, like you were suggesting. It's having conversations not on the record to try and get an understanding of the story, really, and trying to understand what's going on behind the scenes. And I think that's what's so great about a lot of people in Formula One is they understand that you want to tell the story. Obviously, sometimes they can't publicly say the things that they are telling you just because that's just not the way it works, but they can tell you things in a way that can help you. Then you can go and corroborate that with, more team personnel to try and piece together the story yourself, so you can then tell it from a very impartial point of view rather than just one team saying this and perhaps having a slight bias towards what they say. So having the respect of those personnel is important. Having the time to talk to them off the record or just informally. A lot of teams in non-COVID times will do those events like Williams and Red Bull. They'll either get you together for drinks or for dinner where it's informal chat, not on, everyone knows it's off the record. You're kind of just relaxing and chatting about Formula One, and that's when they might open up a little bit more. But obviously, of course, it's all about trust. So they've got to trust the people that are in that room if it's, a wider dinner. They've got to trust you if it's just one-to-one. And that only happens after years, and I've worked in Formula One now. I've done more than 120 odd races now. And so I've been around for a long time. And because when you see so many people over and over again, you do so many stories over and over again, you report the information in a very fair way that someone's given you, they're going to trust you to continue to use that information correctly going forward. And that might mean that they might give you more information. They might keep you in the loop on certain things. It's one of the most interesting and unusual parts of the job, because I don't think there's many jobs quite like it. But it's one of my favorite things, because being a journalist is about, like you said, sniffing out a story or trying to dig out what's really going on. And the only way that you can do that is to spend time talking to people, researching things, going back through, archives and double checking things. And I really like that aspect of the job. It takes time, and there's a battle to do that kind of content in the real world, because now with social media and digital media, there's the need for wanting to get everything out there so quickly, but you can't rush thought or research. That just takes a defined amount of time. And there's been stories that I've got that I can't run instantly, that someone might beat me to, that I then don't run for a number of days after that. But I can be confident to know that the story that I've run, even though it wasn't the first, which is annoying, it's hopefully fuller and it's got as much information as I wanted to put in the story. And that's just the way it is. That's not to say the first story was bad. I'm just saying that, I have a certain idea or goal of what I think makes a story. And if it takes a week or 2 weeks, then fine. That's just the way it is. And that's how I like to go about doing the job, really. So, it's an off the record chat, and discussions with people and getting to know people is hugely, hugely important.
So is one big takeaway for that relationship building to buy the best pairs of trainers possible?
Well, that's a good question. I'd like to think that I was able to do my job before I got silly shoes. But I do think that the silly shoes lighten up the mood, particularly when I'm interacting with drivers, because, and especially last year, really, because it was great that we could go racing in COVID, but it was difficult, it was challenging, it was awkward because of the protocols that we had to have. And so just having something as silly as some bright coloured shoes or some light up shoes to just chat about, kind of just lighten the mood a little bit. And I don't, I'm not trying to make a mockery of anything. It's just something fun to do that was the talking point. Danny Kvyat suggested, he would comment on my shoes every time I saw him, for example. And he said, right, so the way that you've got to step it up the next time is to get dry ice. So the dry ice that you obviously see the teams use on the grid to keep the car cool. And you need to put them in your shoes. And I was like, well, that's a really cool idea. But obviously I can't put them in my shoes because that's probably bad for my feet. So we were talking about how we could design pockets on the side of the shoes to stuff the dry ice in. So when I'm walking, it's like I'm leaving a trail of smoke. And this is like a general chat that we're just having about, obviously it's of no use content wise to anything that I'm doing, but it was just a funny thing to do. And I just got on really well with him. And I don't know whether, I'd like to think that had positive impact on the interviews that we would do when we were then talking about racing or his future or whatever. I'd like to think that had a positive impact on it. It might have had no impact at all, I don't know, but you're all there and you're all doing a job, but also you're all just people who want to have a chat. So it was just quite funny, to be honest. I enjoyed it. It's just good chat. So yeah.
Well, I did too. It was seeing what you're going to be wearing on those weekend warm-ups was always a bit of a highlight, which seemed to be starting the week. So I look forward to some smoking shoes at some point this year.
I've got about five or six pairs new ones for this year.
Is that an exclusive?
Yeah, I don't think I've told anyone else I've got 6 new pairs. No, one's gold, and one is like silver, glittery silver. And then one is like, they're quite high tops, and then like a pink camo brown type color. So yeah, there's some really cool ones coming.
They sound very understated.
Yeah. No such thing as a white trainer. The problem was I'd wear normal trainers. Like I've got like 1 or 2, shockingly, like a white pair and a dark green pair. And people would look at me and go, what's wrong? Are you feeling all right? Why have you got plain shoes on? So that's how far it's come, basically, that I'm known for the colour of my shoes.
On more serious notes, I do want to talk a little bit about the feeder series joining F1. Do you think that when they're there, they enhance the weekend when they're around the paddock, seeing the drivers, seeing the teams go there?
Definitely. I know that so in non-COVID times, when we could go into motorhomes, you'd often find a lot of people actually McLaren on their ground level bit. They're having a coffee watching the F2. It was kind of a thing where people got together to watch the race. I know a lot of the F1 drivers would watch it, maybe just to see how the first corner goes, for example. And they're generally interested in racing anyway. And I think people who are at a Grand Prix love racing, and it's useful to have the feeder series there, because the ideal is that obviously drivers in those formulae will make it into Formula One at some stage, just like Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin, for example, are doing it this year, and Yuki Tsunoda. So it's useful to have that there. And from a fan's point of view, I know that when I used to go to Grand Prix weekends, it wasn't just about the Formula One that I was excited to see when I was in the stands. I wanted to see more racing because I loved racing. I loved British touring cars when I was a kid. So obviously they weren't on the support bill, but I loved watching cars race each other. So I think it's great that we've got these support, and it's great, for example, that we've got the W Series this year. So it's another kind of different type of series on the bill. I think it's great. I think it's really good. I think it's important that, we said earlier that there's such a competition between sports now for people's attention, that I think that if you can pack the schedule with really good racing, you've got a better chance of, keeping the current fans happy and hopefully enticing some more in.
very excited to see the W Series join the support bill as well this year. But sticking on the graduation theme at the moment, you mentioned there you've got Nikita Mazepin, Mick Schumacher and Yuki Tsunoda graduating into Formula One this year. Tsunoda is likely the only one who'll be scoring points regularly. So how do you see Haas, or generally, how do you see the graduates when they go for their rookie season? How do you compare them equally in times where Alex Albon had much more opportunity to score points than George Russell, for example?
The simple answer is you can't compare them. When George, Alex and Lando came up, they were all in very different cars and so had very different opportunities. And Alex has lost his seat and has scored 2 podiums, and George has only scored a point once, and not even with Williams. So, and yet he's still in the sport. So it's not fair to compare them in that sense. You can only just look at what they do with what they have. And so, George and what he's done at Williams, and from what I hear from speaking to people at Williams, he's highly rated. They respect him a lot. They know that he can do a job. And we saw when he went to Mercedes that he could, and often drivers don't get the opportunity to prove that. I think for Mick and Nikita, I guess what they've got to do this year is beat each other. I guess that's the clearest way of kind of showing how good you are. But also just get the team to talk positively about them. So, if there's people talk in Formula One, and if you both do a good job but are still coming 15th, 16th, people are still going to know that you're doing a good job and coming 15th, 16th. If you're doing a bad job and coming 17th, 18th, people aren't going to talk about you. So there's still a way that you can kind of show yourself positively to the rest of the paddock, and because you always want to keep your name in the conversation in the hope that you'll get an opportunity in the future. For Mick and Nikita, it's not really about scoring points this year. It's about settling into Formula One. They can do it in a less pressured environment. Mick, there's so much pressure, on his head because of, the Schumacher name and his father. And I think it's actually a good thing that he's in a car that, isn't expected to score, because that way, if he scores, it's a great thing. And it will be seen as like he's gone above and beyond to do that. Obviously for him, the challenge is he's got to make sure he beats Nikita, because if he doesn't, well, that might just be a point in his career that he might look back on and think that's where it all went wrong, and he doesn't get the opportunities with Ferrari.
That's a point that I do want to raise, that we're seeing the drivers graduating younger and younger, and Lando was a teenager when he came up, for example, recently. And is that something now that Formula One not necessarily has a problem with, but these young drivers have so much expectation that if they're not delivering in those first couple of years, that it's really cutthroat, that there's going to be a 17-year-old who are there to take their place? Is that, I don't want to say a problem, but is that a big consideration?
You know what? I think it's always been difficult in Formula One to keep your seat. I think it's harder now because, like you said, you can get in from a much younger age. But Formula One, it shouldn't ever really be about someone keeping a seat warm. And I think that, there's only 20 drivers who can compete at the moment. And if you've had a year or two and you haven't impressed sufficiently, or you haven't impressed the people sufficiently, then is it fair to then keep out people to give you even more of a chance? Or do you think that's enough time for you to have shown your true colours? I think that these days, if you're a good driver and you're a strong driver, and hopefully you've been blooded in the right way and brought through in the right way, you should be able to show what potential you've got in a year or two. And I think it's unrealistic to expect that you need 4 or 5 years. But I think the way, for example, that Alex Albon's career went, they made it extra hard for him because he spent only half a season at Toro Rosso, which is just not enough, really. I think even if you had put the very best drivers in that car, half a season wouldn't be enough for them to kind of really kick on. And I think he needed a year or two in that junior team where he would have excelled, I think, and then he would have been ready to take that step at Red Bull. And I think we could say the same about Danny Kvyat, to an extent about Pierre Gasly. I think that, okay, fine, don't give them ages, but give them enough time to show what they can, but support them properly throughout that time. Put the arm around the shoulder if that's what they need. Give them tough love if that's what they need. But you kind of need to adapt your strategy to that kind of driver, and then give them the best opportunity to shine. And if they don't shine in that window when you've given them the best shot, then fine, that's their opportunity gone.
Do you think it's something that Tsunoda and Deruvalo, who's in Formula 2, and Liam Lawson, Yuri Vips, list goes on, is that something that those Red Bull junior team drivers are going to be looking at and thinking, wow, this is maybe not where I want to be? Because if I was one of those drivers, I'll be looking at Alex Albon's season and seeing that, you know, it's in and out, and be kind of scared of getting promoted.
Yeah, but let's not forget that essentially when you start out in go-karting and you aspire to get into Formula One, you aspire to be in a car that can win. And a Red Bull is a car that can win races. And the Red Bull Junior program, as it's shown since its formation, gets you into a Red Bull seat. It does. You get opportunities. Okay, a few don't. You know, Carlos Sainz didn't quite work out for him, but look where he's got to. I think that, okay, it's probably going to be nerve-wracking, and there's probably an extra element of pressure. But if you're not in the Red Bull Junior program, you've slashed your chances of getting into Formula One anyway. So at the very least, at least the program gets you in there. And then it's just up to you to kind of deliver enough in that cauldron to prove that either you stay at Red Bull or, you know, AlphaTauri or Red Bull and stay in the family, or you do enough to want another team to come and get you, like Renault did with Carlos Sainz. And now look, he went to McLaren and he's in the Ferrari. So no, I think that the Red Bull Junior program is good. I think it's tough. And Helmut Marko is a tough taskmaster, but I think it's a good thing to have. And if you look at all of the driver programs, maybe aside from Ferrari, it's one of the ones that gives you the best opportunity to be in Formula One machinery, unless you've got financial backing or significant financial backing. So no, I think it's a good thing.
So do you think at the moment with Formula One and the way the Formula One's moving in the future, that the only two ways to get into the sport will be being a pay driver or an academy driver? There's no way of going through with just your talent.
Well, the idea of the cost cap really is to allow a team to function, ideally breaking even, well, at the minimum breaking even, ideally with a profit. And so if they can operate in that way, then there is no requirement really for them to take on a driver with significant backing. Let's not forget that many drivers on the grid bring money in some form. For example, Carlos Sainz is sponsored by a Spanish beer company. That sponsor has gone with him from McLaren to Ferrari, but that doesn't mean he's a paid driver. So I think that a team might be less inclined to go for a driver that brings significant money, like Haas have done with Nikita Mazepin. But I think you're always going to get drivers bringing in some sort of financial benefit. But I do hope that the introduction of the cost cap, hopefully in the medium term, once it kind of settles in, will reduce the need for teams to take drivers with backing and give then young drivers with talent more of an opportunity, even if they don't have a pile of money to bring with them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope so as well. I mean, we see so many drivers just not making it, not taking that step up. But talking about the driver academies as well, I talked just a second ago about the Red Bull junior team looking at how Red Bull work and, you know, any concerns around that. Do you think with Renault, or Alpine as I should say now, that that's something that those drivers might think, well, that's not right, when they see Fernando Alonso returning to the sport, when you've got Guan Yu Zhou and Christian Lundgaard saying, hey, what about me?
It's hard, don't get me wrong, it's hard for those guys to see that happening, which is why I think, you know, if you're in that program or Red Bull, you've probably got a better chance of getting into a Formula One car if you're in the Red Bull program. But the Alpine program is great because they get a lot of time in a car. So they've run that 18 car a lot. And to get Formula One experience these days with limited testing is so important. And Joe's had so much time now in that car that when he gets his shot, and, you know, of all of those young drivers, I think he's in a really good position to get one at Alpine. If the circumstances are right, it can happen, but it's harder for them because they've got no partner teams in Formula One now. So it's not like they can place a driver elsewhere. They did say recently that they would be open to kind of partnering up with a team to try and get their driver in, you know, another team on the grid, even though there isn't like an official relationship. And hopefully that, that comes off, because you feel for those guys who are in that program, and it's not entirely clear that when you get to the top of that program, where you go from there, if they are going to be taking a driver like Fernando Alonso. But that's not going to happen all the time. Like, how often is a two-time world champion with so much experience and who gets on so well with that team going to be available? It's quite a unique set of circumstances. And Esteban Ocon is a real good example of someone who's come through a junior program, didn't make it into a Mercedes-backed team, but has found a way, because Toto Wolff was keen to get him into the seat, to end up in a Renault. So there's no reason why they couldn't, if the driver is good enough. And that's fundamentally what it comes down to, whether the driver is good enough, why they can't end up in a car somewhere else, because team bosses want young, hungry drivers. It's just whether they can come to an arrangement that suits all parties, really.
That's interesting viewpoint. And you mentioned this, the cost cap, and how hopefully that's going to help. But do you think motorsport has a more deep-rooted problem, because the cost cap's, of course, affecting the top level in Formula One, but it's still prohibitively expensive to even get it into British F4, for example? Is that something that you can think will trickle down somehow, or do you think that's just a problem that any promising driver is always going to face?
I think the nature of motorsport and competing in motorsport is that it's more expensive than other sports. If you want to become a footballer or play tennis, you can go to your park probably, and there'll be a pitch or some tennis courts. But to get into motorsport, you need some money to start with to pay for the fuel, or to rent a go-kart. It's the nature of it. But I do believe that there can be a way whereby you reduce those costs, or you subsidize those costs, or you create programs whereby you welcome the best drivers to compete, and the best ones in those gets a scholarship. And there are such things like that. The BRDC did one with Autosport. There are some schemes like that. I guess the push now is to do more of those and try and improve the opportunities for people to get into motorsport at grassroots. I know that Formula One is obviously trying to, it's quite keen to improve diversity and inclusion, and it's working on programs whereby it can give more people opportunities just to get in a go-kart to start with, to see if they like it. And if they like it, are they quick? It's kind of like, we need to kind of follow the talent programs that a lot of Team GB Olympic programs run, whereby they if you're an athlete, Team GB rowing just said, come on down, get on a rowing machine, and let's see what your numbers are like. And if your numbers are good, then we'll start backing you. I suppose it's taken that approach, trying to open up a test opportunity to get people in, and then seeing who is worth investing in the long run. Don't get me wrong, that it requires funding and a significant setup, but that would be the way to do it, I think.
Do you think that's something that Formula One needs to be leading, or is that something that Formula One should be putting the onus on the teams to do, as part of a cost cap? You get a little bit of extra time in the wind tunnel if you're investing $500,000 into grassroots stuff.
It needs everyone involved. It needs, Formula One, it needs the teams, it needs motorsport bodies in each individual country. It needs companies who want to support, racing drivers. I think that, Formula One are trying, or the plan is for them to do what they can to try and put some plans in place to improve access to grassroots motorsports. But these kind of projects are not a work of a moment. You can't just say, right, we want to do this and tomorrow we're going to have it. It's going to take some time. And if you want to do it, you may as well do it properly. So I think it will take time. But I do think, especially in this new era of Formula One, where we've got the cost caps coming in, we kind of, COVID has kind of made everyone realize that we need to try and make the sport sustainable. And that's not just the survival of the sport, but as in its current form, but the long form, in the long term. And that includes bringing drivers through. I think there's a greater understanding and acceptance that everyone needs to play their part. And I do think that over the next few years, we are going to see everyone getting involved to try and find a way to make this sport sustainable.
I hope so as well. I certainly hope so. And Just to finish, I suppose, that you're mentioning that COVID changed everything and it changed the new regulations, which have been delayed. I know we've got minor regulation changes this year. So in Formula One, what do you find, or what are you expecting this year to excite you the most?
I'd like to think that Red Bull will use the stability in the regulations to start this year stronger. And then with a driver lineup where they've got two very strong drivers, they can offer a greater threat to Mercedes consistently and from the off. And I remember when I was previewing the season last year, and there was genuinely a school of thought that I supported that, you know, the two Austria races in Hungary were Max Verstappen circuits. And, you know, if things had gone right for him last year, he could have won all three, and he could have done it if things had gone right for him. And that would have changed the complexion of the championship fight. You know, Mercedes and Lewis would have been on the back foot. And that's what we need this year. We need Red Bull to put Mercedes and Lewis under pressure, because Mercedes, they do a good job year in, year out. You know, they've got great people. So it's kind of down to Red Bull to deliver that. I think Ferrari should really come back this year. If their engine chatter that, you know, things have changed and they've made improvements, they should be closer, but they're not going to be. It's unrealistic to think they're going to be challenging Mercedes for the title. And then the other things to look forward to is the midfield, really. I think that, you know, that battle for third, and what turned out to be third, McLaren, Aston Martin and Alpine, I think is going to be one to watch. I think it's going to be great. I think you've got some new drivers, some new lineups. It'll be interesting to see how Seb does at Aston. I think you're right in that the pecking order probably won't get shaken up massively, but I think there's so many stories to tell because there are changes and movements and rebranding that there's still plenty to be excited about. And it's a transitional year, but that doesn't mean it needs to be a dull year. And I think that there can be some, you know, some great racetracks coming up. Return to the Netherlands. It could be, we could have a, you know, a great season. So I'm really excited. You know, I'm excited every year, but you know, there's nothing that worries me this year about it being a dull one.
Well, that's a great message of hope to end things on. So, Lawrence, thank you so much for your time. And you obviously will be available on F1 TV, on the Formula One YouTube channel, and the Pad Hoc podcast. And yeah, well, hopefully we can catch up with you again at some point in the future. But really hope that you have a great year.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.